So let's jump into yet another Transformer Slag podcast Patreon listener question. Once again, if you want to join the Transformer Slag Patreon, help support the podcast, let us know that we're doing a good job and come join us as part of the Patreon crew, the elite guard, if you will. Patreon.com/Protoman, or check the description below or the tagged comment. You can get your name in the end scroll at the end of every segment moving forward from your patronage. Come join us on the Transformer Slag Podcast Patreon Discord, where we have a lot of cool stuff posted on there. Get some deals on Transformers that we post every week, rare lore, and just come talk about Transformers and see where the news breaks first. You also, at a certain tier, get a little gift box in the mail, depending on how high you are on the patronage. Get some cool stuff in the mail. We actually recently just shipped one out all the way to Australia. And of course, most importantly, the Patreon listener question. We got a cool Patreon listener question from Stitch Productions, and they want to know, and this is a good one, this is something that's been asked quite a few times in the Transformers Slag podcast live stream, but I figured it'd be a good time to cover it here in a segment. Hey Proto, been a long time fan of the podcast for a while. I'm curious on your thoughts of the future Commander class figure for the Kingdom line. Originally I thought it was going to be a bigger character like Skylynx or Jetfire, but with the leaks of the Commander class being claimed to be Rodimus are slowly becoming true, there's this endless possibility. Personally, I want to see a Commander class of Grandus. Thanks for the awesome content. Keep up the great work. P.S. I want to see a new modern Monstructor figure. Do you think that would come eventually? All right, so let's jump into this two-parter. Thank you again, Stitch Productions, for being part of the Patreon and asking this question. So, number one, we'll go in the first part about the Commander class. So, it's been rumored for a while now, and when I mean a while, since there was the early listings of Mutant Rodimus, and it was it might be a leader class or something bigger, and we didn't know the story. And as time progressed and Walmart listings and JT Prime 17 finding stuff through Walmart's app and everything, it more or less is starting to confirm that our Commander class for the War for Cybertron line will be that of Rodimus Prime. And, I guess it kind of goes into that because we have Galvatron that's a time jumper, so that's a possibility too. That being said, what do I think about that and, how that's going to work? It's something where I look at historically, you look at the Commander class that we've gotten thus far. So Jetfire, right, for Siege. He kind of came with all these blast effects, and that really was kind of the gimmick going into Siege. Siege had two gimmicks, which was essentially blast effects and the introduction of Micromasters. And so here's Jetfire that came with a whole bunch of them. I want to say 7 or 8. I know he came with a lot. And then you have Skylynx, and what was his, what is the gimmick of the overall with Earthrise? And it was that of the play sets, the roads, the connecting of the Micromaster play sets or the modulators. So he kind of, turned into this giant play set, even though Skylynx never in the past has been a play set kind of character, but they figured out a way to do something like that. So you then ask yourself, well, what are they going to do with Rodimus? Well, right now, the overarching gimmick of Kingdom has been the fossilizers. Now, how would that work into Rodimus? I don't know 100%, but what I do think is probably going to be a thing is because we have the Ark that is confirmed to be our Titan class, I just feel that there's going to be some kind of also playset compatibility between the two. The Ark is going to be some kind of big playset. Rodimus, his trailer, is going to be some kind of playset. There's going to be some kind of connection there, combined with the fact that the fossilizers that all come apart, there might be some kind of play pattern mixture going on. Some people are saying Rodimus as a commander is way too big. And I agree with you there, but I also think that what they're going to probably do, and you have to look no further than just the MP09 original 2010 masterpiece Rodimus Convoy, Rodimus Prime, the Japanese version specifically. Man, his trailer was huge. his trailer made up more than like 60% of the box and the figure in terms of plastic. And I really feel that might be the same thing here, where we might get a Voyager, maybe slightly taller, but a Voyager Rodimus Prime figure. And all of that plastic for the Commander class is going to go into that crazy trailer playset that will be what makes really Rodimus Prime in a lot of ways. In the same way that we kind of look at, the leader class Optimus Prime. And even though it's a leader class, the figure itself really is a Voyager, and it all falls into that trailer there. But even in the case of the trailer of leader class Optimus Prime, it was very bare bones, that trailer. Not very painted very well on the inside, not a lot of gimmicks. It was very bare bones, where I imagine the same thing could be done with the Rodimus Prime trailer, except now you have that Commander class budget and you could really pack that trailer with a whole bunch of stuff. Again, the original Rodimus Prime toy, let's dial it all back to 1986. That trailer opens up. It was a turret cannon with 2 blast shields, not really much else. You could kind of like plug in his photon eliminator gun on there. So there's probably going to be a lot of plug points for the fossilizers, going to have some kind of gimmicks like that. And just to, have some kind of connection to that of the Ark, and they'll be able to have some kind of play pattern there. That's what I think personally, and that's why I think that that's what it's going to be moving forward more than anything. More or less. Your second question here, you want to see a modern Monstructor figure, and you think that'll come out eventually. I would like that personally. Personally, I would like that. Also because that would then probably push Japan to do like a Generation Selects, Takara Tomy Mall exclusive Dino King, because that's a Transformers Victory character that shares the mold with Monstructor. But, I always say look to the trademarks, and, you kind of have this 50-50 thing going on with Monstructor, where like 50% of the trademarks Hasbro kind of was using, and then they all kind of just died on them. And the other 50% of them, they just never used at all since the original Monstructor way back in the day. I mean, when you talk about like the characters of Monstructor, let's talk about like Ice Pick, right? The orange Monstructor monster was a 2010 trademark that they used for Power Core Combiners, and then they used it a lot more. They used it for Power Core Combiner multi-packs, and then they used it in Dark of the Moon for Human Alliance twice, so they seem to be using that trademark more. And then they just let it roll over and expire in 2014, haven't used it since. When you look at Slog, like Slog is a weird one, because here's this character that was originally a Monstructor limb, and then they started using Slog as pretty much the stand-in trademark name for Sludge for the Dinobots, because they just, at the time, I guess Hasbro couldn't get Sludge for the Dinobots. And so they were using that in a stand-in for Sludge. They were using Slog, and it was used for like the Age of Extinction stuff in 2014 and the G1 Creo and a whole bunch of stuff. But then around the time of when they were doing the actual Dinobots for Power of the Prime, they managed to get the Sludge license back, the trademark, and they just abandoned Slog. And then Slog rolled over, and that trademark expired, I believe it was in 2018. So, and they haven't re-trademarked it since. So that one's lost. Then you're talking Scowl. And Scowl was yet another Monstructor member, and they just let that trademark die all those years ago back in G1 back in the day. And they did have a character named Scowl in the Robots in Disguise 2.0, the 2015 series, but because they never made a toy and they never trademarked the name, they didn't bother with it. And for people who don't know who Scowl was in Robots in Disguise 2015, he was that like evil Decepticon Dinobot. He was an ankylosaur. I believe he was like brownish. He had like some spikes and stuff, but he never had a toy. So they didn't trademark it, and that's that. And then the other 50% of Monstructor, the other 3 members, Birdbrain, Bristleback, and Wildfire, nothing past that original toy. Never had those names trademarked again. Never used in any other Hasbro licenses, whether it be G.I. Joe, My Little Pony, or whatever. Because that's, when I say trademarks, I'm not talking just Transformers. Everything under Hasbro's umbrella. It might show up somewhere else. Like fun fact, the name Devastator. During that downtime of Transformers where they weren't using the Devastator name, they threw the Devastator name onto a G.I. Joe Street Fighter toy just to keep it alive. after they did that Action Master. And then, of course, we had the G2 series, and that kept it going, and the rest is history. But the point is that, you know, they use other lines also to kind of keep those trademarks alive. And then, unfortunately, in the case of Monstructor here, all of their members really have this shaky kind of trademark history. And the reason why I bring this all up is because if they do want to make a Monstructor toy, they would have to trademark all 6 of these guys all over again. Probably the Monstructor trademark too, also just for the name of the combiner, and then take it from there. Again, would I like it? Of course I would, because it would also lead to Dino King and Pretender shells and that kind of stuff that I really enjoy. I love Pretenders. I love Transformer Victory characters. It's a nice mixture of both. But at the same time, it's like Hasbro really isn't showing any signs of interest of doing that character right now, unless they want to release that character but use completely new names across all 7 trademarks. Like, instead of calling it Ice Pick, they'll call it, let's see, what's a trademark that they have that sounds similar? I'm looking around the room right now. You know, they'll just use something else. You know, they'll just use something else. Instead of Bird Brain, they'll use, you know, Firefly. Instead of, you know, Slog, they'll call Slug. Instead of Scowl, they'll use, I don't know, Prowl. You know, like it's, and I know that sounds silly, and they'll probably not do that. But I mean, that's the only other way that they could kind of do this out of left field, is that they were just going to use different names. And they've done that in the past. Look way back in the Energon series back in 2003, 2004, when they did Superion Maximus. Some of the limbs were not named after members of the Aerial Bots because they didn't have the trademarks at the time. So you had a character named Air Razor. You had a character named, what was another one that they called? Well, I know that even in the case of the main component, it wasn't even Silverbolt. You know, so it's that's just kind of one way to figure out what's going to be happening. But I hope that answers your questions. I mean, it's kind of some bad news on both fronts in a lot of ways, but at least it's something that we could address here and talk about on the podcast, and people could discuss in the comments too, what they think about if a Monstructor would be a reality, and their thoughts of Rodimus Prime being the commander class and how that would work from a play pattern and gimmick fashion, especially with the fossilizers more and more becoming a focus of the Kingdom line outside of the Beast Wars and G1 toys just being standalone product. But yeah, that's that more or less. So thanks again, Stitch Productions, with the cool question. And once again, if you want to join Stitch Productions as a Patreon member and come join us on the Discord and have your name in the scroll and get all the cool stuff, or ask a Patreon listener question, patreon.com/Protoman, check the description below or the pinned comment, and come join us and ask a Patreon listener question, or just join us and let us know that we're doing a good job here on the podcast.